Former Guantanamo inmate and once the youngest prisoner ever to be held there, Omar Khadr has received an $8.1 million settlement and an apology from the government of Canada. Some Canadians aren't happy about that. I'm Femi Okay.
And I'm Malika Bilal. Today we'll get into both sides of this polarizing debate. First, though, we'll check in on what people are saying about it online. Well, the settlement has stirred up a mix of reactions and a flurry of commentary. But Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was quick to defend the settlement.
The Charter of Rights and Freedoms protects all Canadians, every one of us, even when it is uncomfortable. This is not about the details or merits of the Khadr case. When the government violates any Canadian's charter rights, we all end up paying for it.
But since the Prime Minister's announcement, online conversation about the payout has moved from reaction to fierce debate. Cabot McKenzie tweets, "Where in the Charter does it say that terrorists are to be awarded $10 million?" And following the settlement, Canada's conservative rebel media raised more than $200,000 to support the children of the U.S. Army sergeant who Khadr was accused of killing. But the payout also has its supporters. Allison Creekside tweets, "Every Canadian citizen paid Omar Khadr 29 cents. Well, some people feel 29 cents is too much to pay for torturing a child. Imagine that." TGI Tax adds child soldier, brainwashing, torture, human rights violations. Khadr was failed by his family, your government, and mine. Femi?
Thanks, Malika. Omar Khadr was just 15 years old when he was arrested and captured by U.S. forces in Afghanistan in 2002 and charged with war crimes. He was accused of throwing the grenade that killed Sergeant Christopher Speer. The Canadian citizen spent more than a decade in Guantanamo Bay prison, where he was tortured and interrogated. In 2015, he was released.
This is it, here he comes.
Then sent to Canada after serving a third of his life in prison. Earlier this month, he was awarded a multi-million-dollar settlement for the violation of his constitutional rights. His case has been intensely followed by the Canadian public and the rest of the world. Here to help us discuss the reaction to the settlement in Edmonton, Omar Mo Alam is a journalist and host of a podcast. Audrey Macklin is a law professor and director at the Centre for Criminology and Socio-Legal Studies at the University of Toronto. John Ibbotson is writer-at-large for the Globe and Mail. And Derek Fildebrand is a member of the Alberta Legislative Assembly from the Wild Rose Party. That's a grassroots Conservative party. Hello, everybody. It's really good to have you here. Derek, this $10 million Canadian settlement, why has it got people so furious in Canada? Can you sum it up? It's about the money, right?
No, it's not just about the money, and there's a lot of debate about the facts of what actually happened on the day that Omar Khadr was captured, and I think we're trying to get beyond the debate of what actually happened there. But there is no doubt that he was captured as an illegal enemy combatant. He took up arms against his own country, and while I'm sure some will debate the facts of it, most of us believe that he did kill an allied soldier of Canada. But moving beyond just that, this, I think, violates our basic sense of justice. Omar Khadr was treated very poorly, and I think it's very fair to say not in keeping with the best legal and constitutional traditions of Canada. And I do agree that we need to be held accountable for that. But I knew
there was a but coming, Derek. So all of that you just said there, he was treated very poorly, but before that, he was treated very poorly. So what should happen to him?
Well, everything before the but, as they say.
Yes, exactly. Doesn't count. Everything before the but doesn't count.
Of course. The problem with this, though, is that the Canadian government has capitulated. I don't believe that they should have just rolled over and handed over $10 million Canadian to Omar Khadr for what he's done, and especially issued an apology. The money is outrageous to Canadian taxpayers, but the apology is outrageous to Canada's sense of honor as a country that has been fighting on the right side of a war that I believe in and the majority of Canadians believe in.
Derek, let me just check in with
I
Audrey,
believe that we
because
should allow
Audrey's
the
been
courts to
working.
decide.
Audrey's been working on this case. Now, I want this to be a conversation, and I know it's going to be a debate. Audrey.
So on the facts of the case, we're still not sure, maybe never will know, whether Omar Khadr threw the grenade that caused the death of Sergeant Speer. The basis of his conviction was that he confessed to it, but suffice to say that a confession obtained under torture doesn't prove that he did it. So that's still an open question. But beyond that, there is little doubt that Omar Khadr was abused, tortured, detained, and that the Canadian government was both complicit in that by taking advantage of his detention to interrogate him further, knowing that he had been abused, and handed the fruits of that investigation over to the United States. And then by its inaction, failing to do anything to protect Omar Khadr by asking for his repatriation when every other Western country had done so.
Audrey, is that worth
successfully.
10 million? Because we were going over very old ground here. It's really the reaction to the settlement by the Canadian public that has made us
So
sort
if
of
the
sit here
concern
in this
here-
round table right now. Is the 10 million the issue here?
So if the concern here is of the amount of money, I guess I can say two things. First, the government of Canada, the previous government, wasted about $5 million litigating two cases to the Supreme Court of Canada regarding its treatment of Omar Khadr, and it lost both of those cases. So with a judgment of the Supreme Court of Canada against the Canadian government, finding that the government had violated Omar Khadr's charter rights, you have to think about what is the prudent step for a government to take regarding further litigation. Is it going to drag the case through litigation at the cost of additional millions of dollars when the Supreme Court of Canada has already found that his charter rights were violated? Or is it going to settle and reduce the financial cost to the Canadian further cost to the Canadian government, and address what would have been probably the inevitable outcome? So the question is really, do you pay now or do you pay later? If you pay now, at least you don't waste time and money of taxpayers, and you let Omar Khadr and everybody move on. So I think there was a certain prudence to settling the case.
And Audrey, I hear what you're saying. Do you pay now or do you pay later? I don't know that idea, though, has really, I don't know that it's hit some people online. They don't want payment at all, and maybe they don't see the reasons and the nuance you were adding there, but I want to share some of those comments. This is via Twitter. Blue Tories is the handle. The North remembers how Justin Trudeau insulted our soldiers with his $10.5 million payout to Omar Khadr, and that's 10.5 Canadian dollars. So you see that here. This is someone who is taking issue with the money. Someone else adds a nuanced comment. This is Jean-Pierre Boutros writing via direct message on Twitter, and he says, the monetary settlement done under the cover of night without fanfare or inquiry doesn't sit well with me, or it seems the majority of Canadians. I accept that Omar Khadr's rights as a Canadian were violated. I accept that he would have eventually received compensation, but it's not about the money. It's about that it was paid without a fulsome process to determine what our country did wrong. And John, I want to bring you in here on this point, because this person does seem to see that, yes, there should have been compensation, but this wasn't the way to go about it.
Yeah, there's a certain political irony in all of this. The Trudeau government is about the only government in the last decade and a half that did not abuse the rights of Omar Khadr. It was the Jean Chrétien government that certainly, according to the Supreme Court, illegally interrogated him. It was the governments of Paul Martin and Stephen Harper that didn't try to get him back from Guantanamo, and in fact actively tried to keep him in Guantanamo because he was seen as a political liability in Canada. The Trudeau government then says, well, he's here, he's free, he's suing us, and he has every right to sue us because we violated his charter rights. We had better settle rather than pay $40 or $50 million when this thing finally comes to an end. And it has become the first really serious political blow to the government because, yes, an Angus Reid poll showed that 7 out of 10 Canadians don't want to see this man paid. For them, he is at best a dubious character and at worst a terrorist. And the fact that he's free to live his life should surely be enough. He should certainly not have sued the government for wrongful treatment, and the government certainly should not have paid. Politically, the best thing that the Trudeau government could have done probably is just drag it out and drag it out and drag it out. In that sense, they're taking a pretty serious political hit for what, in legal terms, was doing the right thing.
Let me just show you this poll that John was referencing. I'm just going to look at a little bit closer. The 29%, this is the blue area here, that was how many people thought that it was the right thing to not only pay Omar Khadr, but also apologise to him. Look at the 71%, shouldn't have apologised, shouldn't have paid him. Omar, how do you unpack that?
Can I answer that by pointing something out before turning it over to John? 8 out of 10 of respondents to that poll indicated that they knew little or nothing about Omar Khadr's story. So 70% oppose the settlement, 80% admit to knowing little or nothing.
Goodness. So maybe we're polling the ill-informed. Omar, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think people are making a judgment on, on misinformation often. I mean, maybe a better term for it is ignorance. I think for the most part, reporters have gotten the story right, but there are still important facts that we keep bungling, and it makes it hard, I think, for people to really realize that this is really about a legal issue. I mean, there are questions about whether Christopher Spear should be considered a combat or not, or rather a medic or not, because he was in combat. You know, the fact that Khadr is the youngest person tried of a war crime in history seems to be largely ignored. But it's also important that we consider that this military court was very problematic. The military court not fit for Americans themselves. And Khadr was tried for a law that was created out of 9/11 that was very, very dubious. And that law makes it illegal to kill a soldier in conflict. Yet he's the only person ever prosecuted with this law, murder in violation of the laws of war. 7,000 Americans have been killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. And yet we keep focusing in on him. He's been used as this political football for more than just having being a convicted terrorist or innocent or guilty. He's being used as this fill-in for all sorts of anxieties and issues that we have in the war on terror and in this country.
So we referenced the poll just a little bit earlier, and we got a tweet on someone who is referencing that. This is close to Rhea, who says, I think the poll mentioned above is fairly accurate. The issue has grown larger than the facts here. So really referencing your point, Audrey, that maybe people don't actually know much about the case. They go on to say many are convinced by false narratives. And so for some people online, that's raising a question on what this means for Canada and Canadian society as a whole. Big question there, but this is D.A.J. Hetherington, who says, conservative reaction to Omar Khadr reveals a party that thinks it can pick and choose who is rightfully Canadian. And that's not how it works. Derek, I know you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, no. Now, just because my opinion happens to fall with the overwhelming majority of Canadians doesn't mean our position is right. You can be right and in the minority. But I do think it's important for people outside of Canada to know how Canadians do overwhelmingly feel, that we overwhelmingly oppose the actions of our government here. Now, Omar Khadr was 15 years old when he was captured, and as such should be treated differently than if he was of the age of majority. He needs to be treated differently, but let's remember he was an illegal enemy combatant, not a legitimate combatant when he was captured. But because he was younger, we do need to treat him differently, and I think that he should consider himself lucky that the country that he took up arms against, that he murdered Allied soldiers of, allows him to walk the streets here as a free man, to enjoy all of the social programs that taxpayers pay for here, and that he can live a free life. But now that's not good enough. Now he wants money for it and an apology for it. And I'm a proud Canadian.
I think he was pretty unlucky.
I'm a proud Canadian, but it makes me ashamed of my government that they would pay a man and put blood on the hands of Canadians supporting someone who committed treason against his country.
Derek, you said my guest. Let me throw something out there before Omar, and then I know Audrey, you want to come back to him, but let me just share something with you from the judgment of the Supreme Court of Canada. We agree with the courts below that Mr. Khadr's rights under Section 7, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, were violated. We conclude that Canadian conduct in connection with Mr. Khadr's case did not conform to the principles of fundamental justice, and they also offend the most basic Canadian standards about the treatment of detained youth suspects. This is a judgment from the Supreme Court of Canada. Omar, what did you want to add? Go ahead.
Well, I mean, Derek called him lucky to be walking the streets here, but I think he was pretty unlucky when he was captured and subject to an illegal interrogation. He was denied an attorney for a while. He was tortured and used as a human mop to wipe up his own urine, and he was prevented from coming home to the country that he was raised in. His charter rights were violated over and over and over again by two different governments. And so if that were to happen to you, to your son, I don't know how anyone would expect things to go any differently. Of course they would ask for reparations. We give reparations for wrongdoings as just part of the checks and balances so that we don't repeat these wrongdoings in the future. That's just part of the legal process.
Well, look, it's one thing to pay this guy, to give him some money, if the courts actually ordered it. Now, the Supreme Court ruled, and I don't think unreasonably, that his charter rights were violated, that wrongdoing was done. I think we all accept that. But the courts did not rule how much he had to be paid out. What happened instead is that the government of Canada cut a deal in secret. It didn't announce this. This was leaked out through the media. They leaked it out. It came out right around July 4th. I think an insult to our American friends. And they cut a deal and they gave him an apology. And an apology was not required by the Supreme Court of Canada.
Right, we hear you. Let's not people get into the conversation. We hear your position very, very clearly. John.
I think we're falling into the trap here. The 8 out of 10 people who may not know the details of the case are part of this conversation. They are the 7 and 10 who oppose the settlement. There is not a strain of nativism and populism in Canada that is politically powerful enough to threaten the entrenched elites, if you will. The way there is in Great Britain and in the United States. We have a center-left progressive government. There is, however, strain, and Omar Khadr is touching at that strain, a strain between university professors and national newspaper columnists and others who pick over the details of this case and who seem to spend too much time defending the rights of an accused terrorist, and the larger population who wonder why this man is A, getting so much attention, B, getting so much money, C, getting so much sympathy. So I don't think it profits us to litigate the facts of the Khadr case over and over and over again. It profits us better to understand the tensions between the different parts of this of the Canadian society and the attitude they bring to the case.
So I'm glad you said that, John, because we actually got a video comment from someone who touches on the reason she thinks those tensions exist. This is Amir El Gawabi, and she's actually a former stream guest out of Ottawa, Ontario. Have a listen.
When you look at Omar Khadr, I think that we have to understand that Islamophobia certainly is clouding people's judgment here. Because if we were to look at any other case where you have a youth offender, someone at the age of 15 years old, it is understood in our justice system that they will be treated differently, that they will have different circumstances in how we're going to rehabilitate them into society. Omar Khadr was never afforded that luxury.
Omar, is that an undercurrent of this debate, or does it not matter?
Well, I think it certainly is. I mean, there are lots of youth that are in conflict around the world. We know of the Lost Boys from Sudan, and many children have fought in wars in Sierra Leone, and yet they have been allowed, I guess, opportunity for rehabilitation instead of necessarily punishment. This wasn't allowed for Omar Khadr, and it wasn't allowed for him because he was at that time sort of the face of the enemy to the West. He exemplified everything that I think we feared in the early 2000s, even still now when it comes to Islamist terrorism. He was born in this country. His family was radicalized. And so that insidiousness, I think it really touched a nerve and struck people's anxieties. But if he wasn't Muslim, if his name wasn't Omar, if he was affiliated with a non-Islamist military in another conflict, would we be treating him this way? Would we have treated him that way and violated his charter rights? I highly doubt it.
Yes, let me just play this to you, and then I'm going to go straight to Audrey. And this is from The Star, and this is Omar Khadr just after he received his settlement payment. He's not even allowed to say he received the payment. Listen to what he had to say.
But, you know, they don't have to believe what I say. Because I could say anything and I could contradict myself. But look at my actions. My past, I'm not excusing it, I'm not denying it. We all do things that we wish we could change. All I can do right now is, focus on today, focus on the present, and do my best to become a productive member of society.
Audrey, what do you make of how the current government treated Omar Khadr, how they wrapped up this apology in this settlement?
The current government, I think, made quite a simple apology for its role in violating his rights. I don't know what is so objectionable about it, given that it is undisputed, and even Derek said it, that his charter rights were violated. So the idea that it's problematic for the government of Canada to apologize for violating somebody's rights, I think is curious at best. I think I also want to emphasize here that although it's casual to talk about Omar Khadr being an illegal combatant and murdering people, that in fact he was convicted of a war crime that was made up after the fact by the United States after he was captured and applied retroactively to him. There is in no way that is consistent with the rule of law as it's understood anywhere. And what that law did was say it is lawful for a U.S. soldier to kill Omar Khadr. It is a war crime for Omar Khadr to kill a U.S. soldier. Now, as I said, I think we may never know whether Omar Khadr did or didn't throw that grenade, but I think it should be clear that any law that says that is a law that doesn't make a lot of sense. So you've got a law that is non-compliant with the rule of law. You have, I think, a general concession that Omar Khadr was tortured and that his rights were violated. It follows that when somebody's rights are violated, that they're entitled to compensation. So to say that somebody should be grateful to be walking the streets of Canada, even though the Canadian government profoundly participated in violating his rights, again, it doesn't follow. If you concede that the Canadian government was complicit in and perpetrated rights violations, then it's hard to object to compensating somebody for that violation. People might disagree about the size of the settlement. I'm not a litigation lawyer, and so I can't tell you exactly how that number was arrived at. And perhaps those others who complain about this settlement have greater expertise than I do in how you quantify the damages of torture, how you quantify the loss
Audrey,
of
someone who
those
might
years.
agree with you on Twitter is Sim. She says, that's why I love Trudeau for doing the right for Omar Khadr. Trudeau is the epitome of first world leader who respects child rights and international law. But this is MG Burst who says, no one can tell the future, but I'd say many people who are sick of the liberal foolishness are presently sharpening their pitchforks. John, do you think there's going to be political fallout?
I think there's no question that this is probably the biggest political hit that the Trudeau government has taken since it was elected in the fall of 2015. To repeat, there's an irony in this because this government probably is less responsible for any abuses that took place than any other government. Nonetheless, they got stuck with it. Could they have announced it differently? Well, the story leaked in the Globe and Mail, and it leaked over a long weekend. So they probably didn't have their communication strategy ready. They probably were caught flat-footed when the phone call came from the Globe. And they've been fumbling ever since, saying at one point, well, we're just trying to protect people's charter rights, and then saying, well, we settled because we were going to have to pay even more if we didn't settle. It looks as though Mr. Trudeau was trying to invent things after the fact. So I think there's no question that the Conservative Party is riding this.
John, I've got 30 seconds. I'm right at the end of this part of the programme before we go online for the post show. How long do you think this story is going to keep reverberating? How long would you say? Got another week?
It'll leave a mark on the government forever. How big a mark, you don't know because the election is still 2 years away. But they're going to. John
Evertson, Derek Fildebrandt, Audrey Macklin, Omar Mo'alam. We are taking you to our post show at stream.aljazeera.com. We will see you there. Thanks very much for being part of the show today. See you online. Hello again. Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about the public reaction in Canada to the Omar Khadr settlement. So, John, you think this is going to always be a milestone in the Trudeau government?
Yeah, it doesn't mean they're going to lose the election over it.
Yeah.
As I say, it's 2 years away, and there's lots of other stuff that can happen between now and then. But things cling to governments like barnacles, and this is probably the first real barnacle that is attached to the hull of the Liberal ship.
I don't believe everything I read online, but this headline was interesting. Liberal support still strong despite Khadr's settlement poll. So people would still, if there was election this week, Trudeau would still win.
Oh,
well,
absolutely.
I don't even know if this is. Sorry, John, but I was just going to
go
say.
ahead.
I don't know how much this is going to politically stick to the government. You know, I'm no fan of the Trudeau government, but that's not really my interest here. But you know, the Canadians who oppose this cut right across all party lines. A majority of people who oppose this settlement vote Conservative, Liberal, and NDP. NDP is the Democratic Socialist Party here in Canada.
Sure.
For those in an international audience, Canadians in all swaths disagree with it. Now, I saw the clip you had of Mr. Khadr talking about wanting to move on in his life, and I want to believe him. You know, 15-year-old people, especially 15-year-old males, do very stupid things in their lives. And I suppose that's to a whole other level. That's not just a youth criminal issue. This was treason and I believe murder. But you know, if he wants to prove to Canadians and truly move forward with his life, free from this cloud that hangs over him, and truly prove to Canadians, then he should voluntarily give that $10 million to the widow and children of Sergeant Spear, who died in that firefight, and to the other soldier who he blinded in one eye. If he were to hand that money over voluntarily to them, I don't think I could have anything more to say as a human who's willing to forgive and forget and let him move on with the rest of his life.
Yeah, I think it's important to recall here that when a soldier kills another soldier, it's a tragedy for the family of the soldier.
He was not a soldier.
He's
an illegal combatant. He was not uniformed, and he's not a legal soldier in the rules of war.
If you say that he was an illegal combatant under law, what's supposed to happen? Then he could be charged with murder, but he was not actually charged with ordinary murder, and he wasn't given the protections and the rights that people accused of the crime of murder are given. So indeed, he could have been potentially charged with murder as somebody who was not a lawful combatant, but he wasn't. And so I think there is, you sort of condemned him or convicted him of an offense for which he was not.
This is someone who fought against Canada. This is someone who took up arms to fight against Canada and our allies, against our crown, against our flag.
So, Audrey, Derek, hold tight for a moment. Audrey, is Derek just wrong legally speaking? Is he just wrong but has a very fierce, passionate opinion?
That is, I absolutely acknowledge that his opinion is strongly held and strongly held by others. I'm just pointing out that there is no legal foundation for it. But what I think it does, to bring it back to John's point, is that there was, over the last 9 years of a Conservative government, a relentless campaign of vilification of Omar Khadr, without doubt. And it was consistent and it was effective. And it's not surprising that it cut across party lines, and it's not surprising that it has stuck. And I think it is, in fact, a concession to that power of propaganda that, indeed, you see that 70% of Canadians oppose the settlement, and 80% of those same people who answered the question admit they know little to nothing about the case.
I wanted to bring in two views here because Derek mentioned what should be done with the settlement money. So here's someone else who has thoughts on that money. This is Aaron Woodrick, the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. And here's what he told the stream.
Just over a week, we got 133,000 signatures from Canadians opposing the payout to Omar Khadr. I think it's fair to say that's a pretty big response from Canadians. And I think simply a lot of them struggled with the idea that a person with such a checkered past as Mr. Khadr was receiving $10 million from Canadian taxpayers, while at the same time, Canadian veterans who fought in Afghanistan are receiving a tiny fraction of that amount. So I think that's part of the reason that a lot of Canadians are struggling, is the size of the payout and the fact that this person was fighting against Canada and Canadian allies, and nonetheless is getting this size of a reward.
So, Omar, you hear about that petition on the other side of the spectrum. This is James on Facebook who says, only morally advanced countries pay for their crimes. Indicating, though, of course, Canada is a morally advanced country. Do you think that this sets a new precedent, Omar?
Well, no, the size of the payout is based on another precedent. We should start with that. In 2007, Maher Arar, who was wrongfully accused of terrorism, he was deported to Syria. He's a Canadian. He was deported there by the United States, where he was tortured and imprisoned. He was settled for $10 million in 2007. So it's fair to say the Supreme Court was using that precedent to decide on Khadr's. Now, they're very different cases. We know that Maher Arar for sure was innocent. We don't know about Khadr's innocence. But Khadr was also imprisoned for 13 years as opposed to 1 year. So I don't think that the 10.5 million, given the history, is all that unusual. But, I can still understand why Canadians are so sore. I mean, for one, we've been told, as Audrey was saying, that he was vilified for so long. We've been told that he is the face of the enemy. And a lot of Canadians feel hard done by in their lives, and they wonder, where is my justice? Where is my payback? Maybe they were abused. Maybe they were denied workers' compensation or something. But it is not a zero-sum game. This is about whether our government is obliged to uphold your charter rights. And if they don't, should they pay a penalty? Now, the answer to that question is either yes or no. I believe that it's yes.
Do you know what I was thinking, Guess?
Surely can't be an insult to the honor of Canadian soldiers that Canada is compensating somebody for torturing them. Surely Canadian soldiers don't support torturing people. And I don't see it as an insult to Canadian veterans that the Canadian government has to compensate for
Canada didn't actually torture anybody.
Not protecting one of its citizens.
Torture is wrong, but Canadians didn't torture anybody. The Americans did, and I believe
That's true.
that when you
and the Canadian
take up
government,
arms against but when you take up arms
what
against
the Canadian
Canada,
government
I think you have
did
forfeited
was
any
interrogate
right
somebody
to
knowing
the
that he'd been
Canadian government.
tortured.
If
And
you
what
were
the
trying to
Canadian
destroy the
government
Canadian
failed to
government,
do
So Audrey
is
and
exercise
Derek,
its ability to protect people
this
from
deep
torture,
into our
which is
conversation,
quite
I hear exactly where you're coming from, and you're coming from either ends of this debate. I think for me, one of the most revealing parts of this conversation and this situation is the fact that Omar Khadr is alive and well and living in Canada and going about his everyday life. We were talking about Canadian values. I'm wondering, Omar, you know him a little bit or know of him. What is his life like now?
Well, I've met him informally, just being out and about in Edmonton. If you go out in the city long enough, you'll maybe run into him. He's oddly somewhat of a local celebrity, and he's a hard face to miss. I have to say the video that you showed of him earlier is very much to the experiences I've had one-on-one with him. He betrays no venom or grudges, and his humbleness and his peacefulness is quite remarkable, and maybe even a model for anyone who's been convicted of a crime. But I think when the country first saw those images of him 2 years ago, he was. I think they would have accepted that at face value. They would have maybe even agreed that he deserved a second chance, and it is hard to reconcile that image, though, with the image of a millionaire. We just generally, as human beings, we don't like, very wealthy people. And I think that's what really strikes people, is that to some people, they see it as him striking the lottery almost. But the truth is, after losing half of his life, he probably needs that to move forward. And his lawyer, who defended him for over a decade pro bono, also probably needs that to make up for the work that he spent. Khadr right now he's learning to become a nurse. He's trying to move on and become a member of society, and he believes that this is going to help him make the best reintegration.
Guess I have to say thank you so much. All the different perspectives you brought to this conversation, it gave us a little idea of the conversations that are being held in Canada right now. I'm going to end up with Malika. What do you have?
Two varying viewpoints. This is one person who says Omar Khadr should have been charged with treason. You fight against the country you're born in, and it's treason. On the other side, Iran Sarah says, as a Canadian, I feel ashamed at the way Omar Khadr was treated by my government. Today, I feel a little bit better.
Thank you, guests, for your time. Thank you, viewers, as well. We will see you always online. #AJStream. Take care, everybody.